How to create an application whitelist policy in Windows. In Windows, it is possible to configure two different methods that determine whether an application should be allowed to run. The first method, known as blacklisting, is when you allow all applications to run by default except for those you specifically do not allow. The other, and more secure, method is called whitelisting, which blocks every application from running by default, except for those you explicitly allow. With the wide distribution of computer ransomware and other malware infections and the high costs of recovering from them, a very strong computer protection method is whitelisting. This allows you to block all programs by default and then set up rules that specifically allow only certain programs to run. Though easy to set up initially, whitelisting can be burdensome as you will need to add new rules every time you install a new program or want to allow a program to run. Personally, I feel if you are willing to put the time and effort into using whitelisting, the chances of a computer infection damaging your computer becomes minimal. This tutorial will walk you through setting up whitelisting using software restriction policies so that only specified applications are able to run on your computer. Though this guide will be geared towards individual users, this same approach can be used in the enterprise by pushing these policies to a Windows domain. The method we use to create the application whitelist policy is through the Security Policy Editor. Unfortunately, this tool is not available in home versions of Windows. Therefore, you may want to instead use a program like CryptoPrevent to configure a blacklisting policy for you. To get started whitelisting your applications, you need to open the Security Policy Editor, which configures the local security policies for the machine. To do this, click on the Start button and then type secpol.msc into the search field as shown below. If you are configuring this for a domain, then you should open the Group Policy Editor instead by using the command gpedit.msc. This guide for the most part is designed for an individual computer, but can be used to create the same whitelisting policy using the Group Policy Editor. To begin creating our application whitelist, click on the Software Restriction Policies category. If you have never created a software restriction policy in the past, you will see a screen similar to the one below. To create the new policy, right-click on the Software Restriction Policies category and select the New Software Restriction Policies option as shown below. The first thing you need to do is configure the enforcement section. This section allows us to specify general settings on how these restriction policies will be configured. To get started, click on the enforcement object type as indicated by the blue arrow above. I suggest that you leave the settings like they are for now. This allows you to create a strong policy, without the issues that may be caused by blocking DLLs. When you are done configuring these settings, click on the OK button. You will now be back at the main Software Restriction Policies window as shown in Figure 5. We now want to configure what file types will be considered an executable and thus blocked. To do this, click on the designated file types object. This will open the Properties window for the designated file types that will be considered as an executable and therefore blocked by the software restriction policy that you are creating. Unfortunately, the above the list is not as exhaustive as you would like and includes an extension that should be removed. First, scroll through the above list of file extensions and remove the LNK extension from the list. To remove the extension, left-click on it once and then click on the Remove button. If you do not remove this extension, then all shortcuts will fail to work after you create our whitelist. Now you want to add some extra extensions that are known to be used to install malware and ransomware. To add an extension, simply add it to the File Extension field and click on the Add button. When adding an extension, do not include the period. For example, to exclude PowerShell scripts, you would enter PS1 into the field and click on the Add button. We will now be back at the main Software Restrictions Policy section as shown in Figure 8 below. At this point, you need to configure the default policy that decides whether the file types configured in Figure 7 will be automatically blocked or allowed to run. To do this, click on the Security Levels option as indicated by the blue arrow below. When you double-click on the Security Levels category, you will be brought to the screen below that has 3 security levels you can apply to your software restriction policies. In order to select which level should be used, you need to double-click on the particular level and set it as the default. Below are the descriptions for each type of security level. Disallowed: all programs, other than those you allow by the rules you will configure, will not be allowed to run regardless of the access rights of the user. Since you want to block all applications except those that you whitelist, you want to double-click on the disallowed button to enter its properties screen as shown below. In the above properties screen, to make it so all applications will now be blocked by default, please click on the Set as Default button. Then click on the Apply and OK buttons to exit the properties screen. We will now be back at the security levels list and almost every program will now be blocked from executing. For example, if you try to run Internet Explorer, you will receive a message stating that this program is blocked by group policy, as shown below. Now that you have configured Windows to block all applications from running, you need to configure rules that allow your legitimate applications to run. The next section will explain how to create path rules so that the applications you wish to allow to run are whitelisted. If you followed the previous steps, software restriction policies are now enabled and blocking all executables except those located under C program files and C Windows. Those two directories are automatically whitelisted by two default rules that are created when you set up software restriction policies. Obviously, in order to have a properly working machine, you need to now allow or whitelist other applications. To do this, you need to create additional rules for each folder or application you wish to allow to run. In this tutorial, we are going to add a new path rule for the C program files x86 folder, as that needs to also be whitelisted for 64-bit versions of Windows. While in the local security policy editor, click on the additional rules category under software restriction policies as shown below. As you can see from above, there are already two default rules configured to allow programs running under C Windows and C program files to run. If you are running a 64-bit version of Windows, you now want to add a further rule that will allow programs under the C program files x86 folder to run as well. To do this, right-click on an empty portion of the right pane and click on New Path Rule, as shown below, as you want to create a path rule for C program files x86. You should enter that path into the Path field. Then make sure the security level is set to unrestricted, which means the programs in it are allowed to run. If you wish, you can enter a short description explaining what this rule is for in the description field. When you are finished, the new rule should look like the one below. You will now be back at the rules page and the new C program files x86 rule will be listed and programs located in that folder will now be allowed to run. You now need to make new rules for other programs that you wish to allow to run in Windows. For example, if you play games with Steam, you should follow the steps above to add an unrestricted rule for the C program files Steam folder. In the next two sections, I have provided tips and other types of rules that can be created to whitelist programs. I suggest you read it to take advantage of the full power of software restriction policies. As always, if you need help with this process, please do not hesitate to ask in our tech support forums. When adding a path rule that is a folder, it is important to note that any subfolder will also be included in this path rule. That means if you have applications stored in C My Apps and create a path rule that folder specifies that folder is unrestricted, then all subfolders will be allowed to run as well. So not only will C My Apps myapp.x be allowed to run, but also C My Apps games gamiapp.x is allowed to execute as well. To make it easier when creating rules, it is also possible to use wildcards to help you specify what programs should be allowed to run. When using wildcards, you can use a question mark to denote a single wildcard character and an asterisk to denote a series of wildcard characters. For example, if you have a folder of executables that you wish to whitelist, you can do so by using a wildcard path rule like this, cmyapps *x. This rule would allow all files that end with .x to execute, but not allow executables in subfolders to run. You can also use a path rule that specifies a single wildcard character like cmyapps app.x. This rule would allow cmyapps app6.x to run, but not cmyapps app7a.x to run. It is also possible to use environment variables when creating path rules. For example, if you wish to allow a folder under all the user profiles, you can specify a rule like %userprofile %myfolder**x. This would only allow executables under that particular folder to execute, but would expand %userprofile% to the correct folder for whoever is logged into the computer. Last but not least, if you wish to run executables from a network share, then you need specify the full UNC path in the rule. For example, dev server files. When creating rules, it is also possible to create other rules called certificate rules and hash rules. These rules are described below. Certificate rule. A certificate rule is used to allow any executable to run that is signed by a specific security certificate. Hash rule. A hash rule allows you to specify a file that can be run regardless of where it is located. This is done by selecting an executable when creating the rule, and certain information will be retrieved by SRP and saved as part of the rule. If any other executables on the computer match the stored file hashed and information, it will be allowed to run. Note: Microsoft has stated that certificate rules could cause performance issues if used, so only use them if absolutely necessary. When Windows, like any other operating system, is created, there are bugs introduced into the software that could affect how the operating system runs. These bugs could cause Windows to not run reliably or could cause security vulnerabilities that would make Windows vulnerable to attacks. When these bugs are discovered, Microsoft creates updates to fix these issues and makes them available through. This tutorial will walk you through recovering deleted, modified, or encrypted files using shadow volume copies. This guide will outline using Windows previous versions and the program Shadow Explorer to restore files and folders as necessary. Many organizations that use remote desktop services or terminal services are not using a VPN connection before allowing connections to their in-house servers or workstations. If no VPN is required, this means that the terminal server or remote desktop is publicly visible and allows connections from anyone on the network and in most cases the internet. This is a major security risk. Many spyware, hijackers, and dialers are installed in Internet Explorer through a Microsoft program called ActiveX. These ActiveX programs are downloaded when you go to certain websites and then they are run on your computer. These programs can do a variety of things such as provide legitimate services like games or file viewers. But they can also be used to install hijackers and spyware onto. Notepad++ is a very powerful text and source code editor with a lot of features. Unfortunately, those features tend to require a lot of settings. This means that common settings, such as the displaying of line numbers, may not always be so easy to find. This tutorial will walk you through showing and hiding line numbers in the Notepad++ editor. VMDR Vulnerability Management. Detection and response, discover, assess, prioritize, and patch critical vulnerabilities in real time and across your global hybrid IT landscape, all from a single solution. Text source: bleepingcomputer.com.